Good evening and welcome to the September 17th meeting of Troy City Council. I'm Marty Baker, President of Council. Please silence your electronic devices for the duration of the meeting. We'll begin with the invocation by Mr. John Terwilliger, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Let each of us pray in our own way. We give thanks for the joys of summer and look forward to the crisp colors of this coming fall. We give thanks that we have the opportunity to live in Troy, Ohio. Help us to make good decisions tonight that make our differences our strength. Bless those who protect us in seen and unseen ways. Provide comfort and relief to the victims of the Hurricane Florence. In our own ways, we give thanks. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist?
Here.
Mr. Heath?
Here.
Mr. Kendall?
Here.
Mr. Phillips? Mr. Lutz?
Here.
Mr. Terwilliger?
Here.
Mr. Sievert?
Here.
Mrs. Oda? Mr. Swazer?
Move to excuse Mrs. Oda.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Sievert and seconded by Mr. Twist to excuse Mrs. Oda. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda is excused.
I'd like to move to excuse Mr. Swazer, please.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Twist to excuse Mr. Swazer. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer is excused.
Move to excuse Mr. Phillips.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Sievert and seconded by Mr. Twist to excuse Mr. Phillips. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips is excused.
Mrs. Knight, please read a summary of the minutes of the September 4th meeting of Troy City Council.
Minutes of Council, September 4, 2018. There was a public hearing on ordinance number 039, 2018. Committee reports, Community and Economic Development recommended that legislation be prepared to approve a replat of 7 parcels on West Main related to Kettering Health Network, with the legislation to be presented after a new plat is received. Finance Committee recommended that legislation be prepared to declare a surplus and sell some vehicles and equipment, and authorizing donation of old fire department gear. Committee recommended that legislation be prepared to accept the tax levies as certified by the Budget Commission. Resolution number R3829, authorizing tax levies, first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 039, 2018, approve application of Troy Hayner Cultural Center for Downtown Riverfront Overlay designation, second reading. Ordinance number 040, 2018, declare certain municipal property as no longer needed for public purpose, was given first reading and adopted. Following various comments, council adjourned at 7:20.
Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Move we accept the minutes as read.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Twist to approve the minutes. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Terwilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Approved.
We'll go on to committee reports, and the Community and Economic Development Committee has the first report tonight from Chairman Mr. Twist.
Thank you, Madam President. The committee met on September 10th to review the recommendations from the Troy Planning Commission that the downtown riverfront overlay district be applied to the Troy Hayner Cultural Center property, to provide for a new signage to be placed with setbacks and height that do not conform to the current provisions. The sign designs were approved by the Troy Planning Commission. This committee supports the recommendation of the Troy Planning Commission and recommends that the DR-O application for the Troy Hayner Cultural Center properties be approved by the council, adopting ordinance number O-39-2018. That's respectfully submitted by Tom Kendall, John Swazer, and myself as chair, William Twiss.
Are there any questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Twiss. Recreation and Parks Committee report is next with Chairman Mr. Brock-Heath.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Committee members Heath and Terwilliger met September 13th to consider a new date to permit overnight camping in a fire pit at Treasure Island Park by the University of Dayton UD River Stewards. This has been approved for September 8th and 9th, but it was canceled due to weather conditions. As camping and fire pits are prohibited by ordinances, council would need to enact a new notwithstanding legislation to permit controlled temporary camping in a fire pit for the UD River Stewards event on September 29th and 30th. It is the recommendation of this committee that notwithstanding legislation be prepared to permit temporary camping in a fire pit at Treasure Island Park overnight only on the dates of September 29th through 30th, 2018, and only by those associated with the UD River Stewards program. In that proposed date is only a few weeks away, we support the legislation being presented as an emergency measure. This is respectfully submitted by Mrs. Oda, Mr. Terwilliger, and myself as chair of this committee.
Are there any questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Heath.
Thank you, ma'am.
We now open the meeting to citizen comments. At this time, does anyone in the audience have any questions or comments related to any of the agenda items this evening? Seeing none, we'll move on to resolutions and ask Mrs. Knight to read Resolution R40, 2018.
Resolution number R40, 2018, resolution expressing opposition to the Federal Communications Commission's proposed declaratory ruling and third report and order streamlining deployment of next-generation wireless infrastructure and declaring an emergency. This is the first reading.
Are there any questions from council?
Madam President,
Yes, Mr. Cooper.
if I may, with there only being 6 members, we will be unable to suspend the rules on a number of this legislation here this evening. It requires 7 to suspend the rules.
Okay.
It's 6 for emergency, but 7 to suspend the rules.
Okay. Thank you. So that will go to another reading. Mrs. Knight, please read ordinance O39, 2018.
Ordinance number O39, 2018, ordinance approving the application of the Troy Hayner Cultural Center for the Downtown Riverfront Overlay District designation. This has been recommended for approval by the Troy Planning Commission, and this would be the third reading, and it could be acted on.
Since this is the third reading, we may go ahead and act on this. But first, are there any comments or discussion from council?
Madam President, I have a comment.
Yeah, Mr. Lutz.
I attended the committee meeting on September 10th, and I do plan to vote for this ordinance, but I'm very concerned that future applications for the DRO may come forward that deal specifically only with signs. And my concern on that is that we already have a planning commission, we already have a board of zoning appeals in place. I would hate to try to create an environment in which those two standing bodies aren't heard on these types of sign things, in which sign applications have usually gone through those bodies in the past. What I don't want to create is a situation where if people in the DRO don't feel like the sign code exists, well, let's just go for DRO and circumvent our sign code. That's my major concern with this ordinance.
Okay. Any further discussion or comments or questions?
I'll move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Sievert to adopt the ordinance. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Twiss,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mr. Kendall,
Yes.
Mr. Lutz,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger.
Yes.
It is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read ordinance 041, 2018.
Ordinance number 041, 2018, ordinance amending ordinance number 034, 2018, authorizing the use of an area of Treasure Island Park for a 2018 University of Dayton River Stewards Program event, notwithstanding conflicting provisions of the codified ordinances of the City of Troy, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. This would be to have the event September 29-30, since it did, the prior event had to be canceled due to inclement weather. First reading.
Mr. Kerber, I have a question on this then, since we cannot suspend the rules, and this is the first reading. That means that it'll be required for council to have a special meeting in order to enact this, then, correct?
Did you not say that emergency legislation can be suspended?
You have to suspend the rules first. It's 7 to suspend it, and then 6. So yes, and there's a mechanism in place for a special meeting. I would anticipate council would want to entertain that.
Right, okay. Mrs. Knight, please read ordinance 042, 2018.
Ordinance number 042, 2018, ordinance amending ordinance number 030, 2017, as amended by ordinance number 019, 2018, and ordinance number 021, 2018, appropriating funds necessary for the various departments and offices of the City of Troy, Ohio for the year 2018. This is one of the routine reappropriations council considers during the year. First reading.
And this will also go to a second reading then. That completes the business portion of tonight's meeting. Mrs. Knight, are there any communications or announcements?
No, they're not.
Mayor Beamish, do you have any comments this evening?
I just appreciated the invocation today. I just got back from North Carolina, and I will tell you, it has been a tough weekend for anybody that lives in North Carolina. But I was able to get back. Thinking of that, the 36th Annual Mayor's Prayer and Praise Gathering is going to take place on October 13th. That is a Saturday morning. It starts at 9, finishes at 10:30. Mr. Kerber is one of our advisors for the Mayor's Youth Council. They will help serve, but it's at the Presbyterian Church. And I would encourage people, you know, in the way things are in our country and the world, prayer is needed. And I appreciate the prayer that Mr. Terwilliger shared tonight. So that's it. I just want to let you know that that is coming up, and there are tickets available here in the mayor's office. Thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
it. Oh, and if I can add,
Sure.
the keynote speaker. This is really good because we've all passed legislation for the Pink Ribbon Girls. The keynote speaker will be the CEO and president of the Pink Ribbon Girls, Heather Salazar. We're really excited about having her as a speaker. So another good reason to be a part of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Titterington, do you have any comments this evening?
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Thank you. Director of Law, Mr. Kerber.
I have nothing, Madam President. Thank you.
Thank you. City Auditor, Mr. Friggy.
Thank you, Madam President. I have nothing at this time.
Are there any comments from council members this evening?
Madam President, I just want to follow up on
Mr.
Mr. Lett's.
Sievert?
I'm sorry. I just want to follow up on Mr. Lett's comments. I think that it's probably in order, and I've talked to Mr. Tiddington, that we do review the DRO legislation a little bit in light of Mr. Lett's comments and some things that transpired at the last council meeting. So I would ask that we do try to schedule something to take a look at that. I kind of drafted it, and like everything else, it's a work in progress, and there may be some things that we need to tweak to make it a little bit more effective, and I'd like us as staff to look at that.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments from council?
Yes, Madam President.
Yes, Mr. Lutz.
Thank you. Over the last couple weeks, I've been invited to speak to many groups on the United Way campaigns. It's getting to be United Way season. There's really no better group that can help make our community as strong as United Way. And we're living in a new environment where we now have one United Way for the entire county. So I'm very excited about that, and I hope everyone that is here and listens at home considers making a donation to the United Way. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from council? Any comments from city staff this evening? Anyone in the audience have any questions or comments? Thank you. We'll need a motion to go into executive session.
I move to go into executive session.
Second.
There's been a motion made to go into executive session, and that is for the purpose to confer with legal counsel concerning pending or imminent legal action. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
The motion is approved.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Titterington.
Just so the audience knows, we don't anticipate taking any action after the executive session.
Okay. Well, if you choose, you're welcome to wait. If you choose not to, we thank you for attending tonight's meeting. Have a safe and peaceful. May we have a motion to reconvene
back into
regular session?
non-executive session.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Heath and seconded by Mr. Kendall to return to regular session. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Okay, we're back in regular session.
Okay, and meeting adjourned.